Hey guys, welcome back. So this is a video I've been talking about doing basically since I started this channel, which is like 3 years ago. And that's a video all about pawn and DIY pawn. And while I've been getting requests to do pawn videos, I personally didn't feel like the need to do it because I had access to pawn that I like to amend. But now it feels like lechuza has well and truly abandoned the North American market. It's been rumored for a long time that they were shutting down US production, but then sometimes people will say like, I heard from them that they were going to be available again in 5 weeks. But also I feel like that's kind of like when a hostess at a restaurant will be like, oh, it's a 20-minute wait, because that's the amount of time that most people will be fine to wait for, but it's really like an hour and a half. And at this point, I don't think lechuza pawn is ever going to be available again in North America. And before we get into talking about pawn, I just want to make a quick disclaimer. I am not a soil scientist. I'm literally just a girl. I cannot give you hard data. I can't give you graphs. I can't give you anything except for my experience. I've been using lechuza pawn for basically about 5 years. It used to be my #1 go-to substrate. I was planting everything in it. But in the last couple of years, I've started moving more back into soil, and primarily tree fern soil is my #1 used most substrate. Tree fern fiber, amended tree fern fiber is my second most used substrate, but I would say that pawn is probably my third favorite substrate. And since I ran out of my last bit of lechuza pawn, I've been really feeling like a gaping hole in my game, and not only as using pawn as a substrate, but using the pawn mix as an amendment for other substrates. It was so useful and I really miss it. So today is the day we're finally going to mix them up. So in this video, we're going to talk about pawn, kind of the benefits of pawn, and also some of the cons of using pawn. Is it really necessary? Plants I really enjoy growing in pawn, plants I don't really like growing in pawn. And then we're going to mix up a batch of DIY pawn. Now, full disclosure, I've never personally mixed this before, but I have used this exact mixed by other people before. So I know that it works well, and the components are exactly the same as lechuza, except that the particle sizes are a little bit bigger. And I also want to talk about ways to amend that base mix of lechuza pawn for different varying reasons, like reasons that I would personally amend it for. And I also want to go through the costing of what it would cost me to buy like the best value amounts, quantities of these components, and how much pawn that would make me and how that would compare to lechuza's price. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants that need pawn attention. And I'll try to remember any other questions I frequently get about pawn and talk through those. So let us first start by talking just like basic information about pawn. So pawn was made popular by a company called lechuza, which makes a lot of self-watering planters. I believe it's a subsidiary of a company whose main focus is Playmobil, like not the Lego, but the chunky Lego. I always thought that was kind of interesting, but this mix, I believe, existed in like the horticultural space, that people would mix it themselves, but I don't believe any company really mixed it and sold it as a product before lechuza. I mean, I could be wrong. I've never heard of a company that did that, but I don't think that pawn was ever meant to be the core business of lechuza. It was always meant to be their self-watering planters. And I don't even know that their margins are great on the pawn. I mean, it could be, but it makes sense that they wouldn't be focusing on the production of it and keeping it in stock at all times if it was all making them a ton of money. And that might just be to do with their company structure and like the equipment they need to mix all of this stuff at the scale that they were doing it at. But they've always been very open about what their mix is. It's never been a proprietary thing. So they've always said that it's a mix of pumice, zeolite, and lava rock, and also slow release fertilizer added to the regular lechuza pawn. And then they later came out with basic pawn, which doesn't have slow release in it. And then a more recent addition they brought to their line, which I've never seen in North America. I mean, I didn't look that hard, but I've never heard of anyone using it over here, is orchid pawn, which is basically lechuza pawn. So the zeolite, pumice, lava rock, and they also add humic granulates, which is, I believe, granular forms of humic acid. And they also have the slow release fertilizers in it. So it's basically an inorganic substrate of minerals that they don't break down easily, they don't crush easily, so it always provides a nice structure for airflow in your roots. The pieces are a lot closer together than leca, and individually the components have some benefits that leca doesn't have. But then one thing about lechuza's version of the pawn that's different from basically any DIY pond that I've ever seen is that the particle sizes are quite small. So by volume, it's going to be a lot more dense than a DIY pond. One thing people really like about pond is that it holds water really well in a self-watering setup. You can go a lot longer without watering. It's a lot easier to water because water kind of just falls through. It's easier to keep an eye on a reservoir. It's also like free flowing, so you can scoop it and it falls. I find it really easy to repot pond plants because as you're tipping it out, what's like loose will kind of come falling out. It's easy to pour in, shake it around, and it kind of falls between the gaps between the roots. And the compotas themselves are rocks and they're not as like fragile as perlite, for example, so you can keep reusing it over and over again. But one of the cons that I found with lechuza pond is that because the particle sizes are so small compared to the DIY version, by volume it is really dense, and there's not a lot of room for roots to grow through if you're planting in no drainage, because there's only a finite amount of room inside of that vessel. It doesn't stretch. I also found it like way too physically heavy by weight. It's just like it weighs so much. I always wanted to lighten it up, so I've always added coarse perlite and orchiata to the pond. I've always used the classic grade orchiata, which is the smallest size orchiata that they do. This is not an original idea to me. I learned about it from Jing, who saw it from the Hoya community. So there's a guy named Jeffrey, and I don't think he even has an Instagram because people ask me about this. He runs the Hoya Obsessed Facebook group, and he, I believe, sells his mix through Raven Vision, but his version of the pond has orchiata in it. Jing liked using it, so I started adding it to my pond, and I also really liked it, but I could never put my finger on why I liked it more. One thing I liked about it is that it kind of increases the overall water retention of the substrate. It makes it a little bit lighter, and over time I was suspecting that the added organic element helped to maintain healthy microbiome inside of the substrate, because otherwise it'd just be completely inorganic. And because I use myco and beneficial bacteria, I assume that the added organic element helps to maintain that population. One other reason that people really like lechuza pond is, and the same thing goes for leca, is that it helps with reducing fungus gnat populations. Now, I can't really speak to that because I've never had a huge issue with fungus gnats, except for one winter where I had a lot of fungus gnats. I use mosquito dunks, which is like a killer bacteria, and they kind of went away, and it's been really kind of almost not that noticeable ever since. And I primarily grow in soil, so I think it's because I have like a crap load of spiders in my house and I don't really do anything about them. I just kind of let them live and I just clean up their cobwebs periodically, but I let them do their thing. And there are spiders living in my tent, there are spiders living in my milsbo. I believe they're doing their part in maintaining the fungus gnat population in this house. So I can't speak to that, but I do think there's truth to the idea that like semi-hydro substrates like lechuza pond and leca will reduce or be less a hospitable environment for fungus gnats to breed. So I really do think that pond is a wonderful substrate, and I can't really think of any genus of plant that couldn't grow in pond. Like I said, I used to grow the majority of my plants in pond, so philodendron, anthurium, begonia, hoya. What else have I had? Epipremnum, scindapsus, and I will say like some of them as a whole, like across the board, some genera liked it more than others, but I can't say that it was a bad substrate for any of them. Even for desert plants, I think it would be a great substrate. You just wouldn't keep a reservoir on it necessarily. You would use it a little bit more like soil. But I think the plants that I tend to favor pond for planting in are definitely alocasia, hoya, and begonia sometimes. Previously in the past, when I owned scindapsus, I no longer do, but when I did grow scindapsus, that was the substrate that would actually get them to grow. Like I couldn't get them to grow in moss, soil. What else have I tried with them? I don't think I tried leca, but moss and soil. I couldn't get scindapsus to grow at all, but they just started sprouting like crazy in pond. I also think it's a great substrate for epipremnum, but again, I don't own any epipremnum anymore. I used to grow a lot of anthurium in pond, and I've gotten the question many times that like, why don't you use pond anymore for anthurium? And it's not that it was a bad substrate ever. I always liked it for anthurium, but I just thought tree fern soil was even better. Like it surpassed any expectation I ever had for a substrate. And I was getting growth that I just never thought was possible with my level of skill and my expertise and my conditions here in Canada. So I don't rule out pond for anthurium. And it's definitely something I would be I am reminding myself that I should try it with plants that maybe aren't doing well in tree-fern soil, but I will continue to use tree-fern soil primarily for anthurium. But also in saying that, there's so many growers that grow incredible plants. I can think of like 5 off the top of my head that use pon as their main substrate, go-to substrate for anthurium. So I'm thinking Amanda, who's Bunny on Instagram, she uses just like straight up lechuza pon, like unamended. She just uses it straight out of the bag. Josh and Paulina of Phytorat does that. I think Granthuriums uses pon primarily. I think Paul at Understory Oasis uses a DIY pon, so not lechuza pon. But I also think it's not a magical substrate. It's that it's magical for them and their care routine and their conditions. So someone's at my door. You know, when you move from an apartment to a house with a front door, one thing you don't really think about is how many door-to-door salesmen come by your door. Like, that was not something I was anticipating, but it happens so much. So now the dogs are barking, so we gotta wait for that to end. I don't even remember where I was going with that, but basically what I want to say is that if you're new to pon and you want to, like, because you're hearing all these amazing things about pon, I would highly suggest that you don't move your entire collection to pon all at once. I would advise that you do a few, especially plants that you kind of really understand how they behave when they're thriving and how they're behaving when they're not thriving, and monitor those. Like, do those first, monitor them, and then just observe, how do you like taking care of this plant in this substrate? Like, is it too dense for you? Is it too dense as in like tightly packed? Is it too heavy for you? Do you want to lighten it up? And is it thriving? How often are you finding that you have to water it? And then maybe make amendments and little tweaks for future, because I would say the straight up basic pon recipe is not a one size fits all for everybody. So with all that said, let's make up a batch of DIY basic pon. I've already kind of washed the components. It's not perfect. There's going to be a bit of like muddy runoff, but it's not as sludgy as before. And I've already pre-measured them out, so you're gonna have to take my word for it on the volume. So the first component is zeolite. So, okay, there's a bit of a story with this. This is zeolite, kind of, and it's the Eco Traction Pro. So it's not an ice melt, but it's like an ice grip. It's eco-friendly, it's dog-friendly, it's not salt. It lasts a really long time on the roads, and it just provides grip in the winter months. So Eco Traction Pro is the one you want for pon, not Eco Traction. Eco Traction, the regular one, is a lot finer than Eco Traction Pro. It is so fine, it's even finer than what would go into lechuza pon. And a lot of it is just like sandy. So do not use this, like, don't even bother. You can't really make it work. If you sift out like the larger particles, you're gonna be wasting a lot of product. So always go for Eco Traction Pro. So if you were looking at my zeolite and you were like, that's not all zeolite, you are correct, because this, unbeknownst to me, well, it slipped my memory that I had mixed a bunch of lechuza pon into my zeolite. So I had bought this probably like 2 years ago when I planned to do this video, and I never did. And I bought a bag of zeolite. I had some leftover lechuza pon, and they were in separate bins, and I was tidying things up and I wanted to consolidate, so I just mixed the two together. So this is majority zeolite, but there is some lechuza pon in there. But just for the sake of me, just pretend like it's all blue, and that's what Eco Traction Pro looks like. So zeolite is a mineral, and the main function, I believe, in pon is that it has a really high CEC, or a cation exchange capacity, where it can just basically soak up a lot of stuff and hold on to it, and then release it back into the substrate once it's kind of fully charged. So it ends up being a good pH buffer. So your pH isn't gonna like swing wildly. It won't make your pH a specific number. It will just make it more stable. And I believe it should also help with not burning your plants with like too strong of fertilizer. But I believe it stands to reason it will only be up until a certain time when it's like fully charged, and at that point, if you like go ham on the fertilizer, you might still burn your plants. The second component is lava rock, which this is lava grip, which is also another ice like winter month road grippy substrate. If you're going to get this, it's beautiful, it's black, it looks so pretty. you want to rinse this outside. There's a lot of sludge that comes out of it. It's like a lot of silt that it's really hard to, it's not good on your pipes, and it also is hard to wash because it's so heavy. So when you're washing lechuza pond, you'll notice like a lot of like muddy stuff comes out that's pretty easy to wash off. This is not like that. This is like heavy. It's basically like sand coming out of here, like it's small little lava rock particles. So lava rock is a lot more porous than zeolite, and it will make sure that there's always airflow through the roots. It's just adding more to the aeration. And I think there are micronutrients in lava rock, which I believe the main one is iron, that it slowly releases over time. I might be wrong. I don't know. Again, I'm not a soil scientist. And then the last component is pumice. So this is a coarse pumice, and it is definitely the lightest component of all three. Again, it's there to increase aeration, and it just, a lot of these components do a lot of the same thing. So they're not like one unique purpose that they have. That a lot of them have very overlapping benefits. But for me, of the three, the pumice is the largest size, and so it's going to make it a little bit more chunky, which I do want, especially if I'm planting things with thicker roots like anthurium. I want to make sure that there's enough gaps between each particle for roots to go through. So for my recipe, I'm going to be doing equal parts pumice, zeolite, and lava rock. And a lot of recipes you'll see people doing half the amount of zeolite or just less zeolite in general than the other components. But personally, I want to make sure there's a lot of zeolite because A, I have a lot, and B, I want to make sure there's enough zeolite to buffer and absorb the excess nutrients, because a lot of the plants I plant in pond are being planted in no drainage. So I'm just aware of potential mineral and salt burn. And then we're going to add the lava rock. This is so heavy because I literally just washed it yesterday. And then the pumice. And then we're going to do some nice crunchy mixing. You know that girl that does the ASMR with the wood soup where she has that bowl of water with like little wooden balls in it? She keeps adding like wooden ingredients and she stirs it around with a ladle, and it's just like the sound of little wooden balls knocking together, and it sounds so good and just puts you to sleep. I could listen to this for, this could be my lullaby, like mixing pond. Okay, I did a quick check of the bottom and it's not all blue, so I feel like the zeolite, which is the bottom layer, has been sufficiently mixed upwards. And it looks like a pretty decently even mix now. So one thing I'm not putting in is slow release fertilizer, because I do use fertilizer in my water for every watering. One thing you can add to this is Osmocote, which I do have, but I am not going to be adding Osmocote because some of you who've been around for long enough know about killer pond, which is when I amended lechuza pond with my usual like perlite and other stuff. And I added just way too much Osmocote, and everything I planted in it died. And I just don't trust myself to know how much to add to pond to make it safe. And also I don't really need a slow release fertilizer, but you can just be very sparing with it, because too much Osmocote can just burn your roots right off. And of the plants I planted in the killer pond, almost everything died. At the very least, all the roots were burned off and I had to restart the plant, and some of them just straight up died. And I miss one of them pretty dearly. It was my Warocqueanum esmeralda, which at the time I bought from Tropicals as Anthurium Warocqueanum by Waterburyanum, but later I think they just started calling it Warocqueanum esmeralda because it's not actually that hybrid. But anyway, that is why I'm not adding slow release to this. Although it is definitely chunkier than lechuza pond, I do want to make it a little bit airier. But before we do that, I'm going to just tell you the costing on this for me specifically. So these are in Canadian dollars. It's what I bought it at, and I'm going to tell you the prices including tax, because obviously that's what I paid. So the zeolite, the Eco Traction Pro, I bought it for $42.47 including tax, and now that does not include shipping. So this is just the product price, not necessarily the shipping price. And the big bag of Eco Traction Pro is 22 liters of product. give or take. It doesn't say on the box, but I did email them to find out how many liters, and they calculated it to be 22 liters of product. And then the pumice I got from Garden Works, it was a 20-liter bag for $16.80 including tax, and that is a 20-liter bag. And then the lava grip or lava rock I got from, I actually bought it for $5 because someone was clearing out what they had, but it normally costs about $30. So it would be $33.60 for me for 20 liters if I were to buy it straight from the store, but I personally paid $5, but let's just call it $33.60. So the total cost of all of that would be $92.87. So if you're doing equal parts, like 1:1:1 like I just did, the only component you're going to have leftover of is the zeolite, which is slightly over 20 liters, but everything else is 20-liter bags, so it's almost perfect. And so you're going to be able to make 60 liters of product total, because 20 liters, 20 liters, 20 liters, you're going to be making 60 liters, and that's going to cost you $92.87. Lechuza pun, by contrast, would be for 30-liter bag, which is their largest bag, is $90 Canadian, and that is not including tax. So 90 plus tax for lechuza pun for 30 liters for half the amount. So it's almost half the price if you make it this way. But one thing I want to add to this is orchiata, because I really like orchiata in my pond. And so for orchiata, the best value I can get is a 35-liter bag for, including tax, $78.34. So it's definitely the most expensive component. So if I did equal parts zeolite, pumice, lava rock, and orchiata, it would cost me $171.21, and it would make 80 liters of product, and I would have leftover orchiata. So I would have about 15 liters left of orchiata and about a couple liters left of zeolite, and that would make 80 liters of product for $171.21. Which by contrast, if you got 80 liters of lechuza pun, it would be about $240. Actually, that's not true. You can only buy them in 30-liter bags, or the value is not as good when you get smaller bags. So you'd buy three 30-liter bags, so you get 90 liters for I don't know if anybody even really cares. But I made a spreadsheet and everything. But anyway, my point is that even if you add orchiata, this is going to be cheaper than lechuza pun. Not that it even really matters, because we can't get lechuza pun anyways. And I also couldn't even get orchiata at the price that I told you at. That was like the best value, because I tried to order it and they were out of stock. So I had to go to a local place, and they have it in, like, they basically buy the big bag and then they repackage it. So this bag was $18 for 8 liters, which is not terrible. So if I'm going to do an equal amount of orchiata, basically for the other components, I've had it just under this line. Can you see? Just under this line on this bowl. So I'm going to fill it to about here. And I'm not rinsing it, because it's not as bad to not rinse orchiata as the others. As a cloud of dust forms. And so that's gonna, I really hope that fits. It should fit. It's a tight squeeze, but it fits. I would typically do this in a taller bin, but I'm totally out of those. So in looking at this, I probably could have done with less orchiata. I don't think that this is bad, but I probably didn't need to go in that hard with the orchiata. So maybe it would have been better to do 0.5 parts orchiata to 1 part of the rest. But in looking at this looks like the perfect little amendment to tree fern fiber. Like, I'm thinking one part this to 1 part tree fern fiber for the finicky ones. This feels like such a bougie substrate, but orchiata can be, it's not as expensive as tree fern fiber. And if you want to lighten this up even further, then I would add a coarse perlite to it. And I personally would add coarse perlite to this, but I'm running really low on perlite, and I'm supposed to get more from Jing tomorrow. So I'm not going to be adding perlite today, but that is another amendment that you can make to just lighten it up. But I will say, if you add perlite to pon, it tends to dry it out a little bit faster, just because it's so airy. Because I always noticed that my pon plants would dry out a lot faster than other people who plant primarily in pon, and I would always like be wondering, why are my pon plants so thirsty and theirs aren't? And it's because they don't add perlite to theirs. So anyway, this is the finished product, and that's what we're going to be using to plant up these few plants that I have that are desperately needing some attention. A couple of them are already in pon, and I'll show them to you one by one, but all of them are going to go into this substrate. So most of the plants I want to repot today are alocasia. The first one doesn't really need a repot. This one is in pon and perlite, but I don't think this is lechuza pon. It's really hard for you to see this because it's all covered in algae, but this is like, I think a DIY pon. This is from Charmaine from, I always forget the name of this place, Variegated Plant Shop. And then she amended it with more perlite to make it lighter. And I think this one, like I can literally do it right now. I just want to top up the stem with a little bit more pon. And I literally just watered it yesterday, but I keep underwatering this plant. And that's why it's only a one leaf little sad thing right now. This alocasia keeps going back and forth between like variegated leaves and all white leaves, and then I'll be like, just kidding, I've got some green in me, and then it'll go back to all white, and I don't know if I want to keep it for very long. While it's growing leaves with green on it, I will keep it, but the next time it throws all white, so help me God. I also just watered it yesterday. The water line is quite high, so I'm not going to do anything other than that. So that was the easiest repot I've ever done. The next one is another Frydek, which is very stretched out right now. This was one that was grown from corn. I got it from my friend Jessie, but it's like green on green. Here is the newest leaf. The variegated parts are not white. It's always been like this ever since its first leaf, and the first leaf that grew out was in quite high light. It currently lives inside of an exo, but it's being shaded. So the pot's like down here and there's some leaves here, so it keeps stretching past the leaves to get to the light. It's doing all right given that I neglect this a lot, but this one is planted in stratum and perlite. It's fairly well rooted in here, not fantastically rooted, but I want to get it potted up into just like a proper pot and maybe try to get it somewhere where it gets more light. I don't know, but stratum to me, it's really good for alocasias. I feel like stratum's really good for mitigating transplant shock because alocasias hate being repotted. So I'm going to try to keep this in the core of the pot and just like fill in the rest with the pon I just made up. It would be cool to get this one to grow big. I would love to get it out of the exo, but I feel like it's gonna get spider mites like immediately. So I don't really know what to do, but for now, because it's in stratum, it dries out too fast. So I wanna get it into a bigger pot with pon. The next one is this plant that I got last year from my friend Dania. So this one came to me as a corm. It's the Alocasia tanderusa. So she gave me two little sprouted corms in moss, and I repotted them into mostly stratum with a bit of perlite in it, and both of the corms sprouted. I gave one, now one is living with Charmaine, and I have the other one. It's been growing pretty well. It's a little bit bleachy, and I find this is such an easy to bleach alocasia. Like whenever I see this in garden centers, they probably look a bit more bleached than this actually, but I really like it. It's actually one of my boyfriend's favorite plants. He really liked the Alocasia sanderiana nobilis, but mine unfortunately has passed away, and so there's this one, but this kind of shape alocasia he really loves. He says it reminds him of Rocco's Modern Life. So like the trees in Rocco's Modern Life, like have that kind of wavy, you know what I mean? You probably don't know what I mean, but anyways, it's this size now. Do you guys want to see the size of the pot? Look at it. It looks so stupid. It looks like a fake palm tree. Like, you know those artificial plants where it's like a whole big fiddle leaf plant, fiddle leaf fig, and then the pot is like a 4-inch size. That's what this looks like. So again, this one really loved the stratum. I'm going to try to keep that as much as possible. I know that stratum doesn't last forever and it will disintegrate, but I think it's fine. I don't know. I don't think it'll be detrimental. Like alocasias like it pretty dense anyway. And the last alocasia is this little cutie. It's doing fine. It doesn't actually need a repot for like root space purposes or anything. It's really just the fact that it's in actually regular lechuza brand pon, and I just want to get it out of this cup into something cuter. And this was also grown from corn, so this was my dogs are barking. I'm sorry if you can hear that. This one I got from my friend Andrea sometime last year, and it's been going pretty well. It lives in mealybug land. I don't know if you can see some dead mealybugs down here. So as soon as I get this repotted, it's going straight back downstairs because I don't want mealybugs infiltrating this room. But this is one of my favorite alocasias. I like it more than the Maharani, which is a hybrid of this and black velvet. I just really love that round shape, and it's just a little bit more rhino-y than the Maharani. Maharani is just a little bit smoother. I love the texture of this. I love how gray toned it is. I've been wanting a mellow for years, and I don't know why I never got one. And I've had so many opportunities to, and so she just gave this to me last year, and I was so happy. And this one lives in my living room, and it just needs to be cuter to live on the plant shelf. And then the last one you guys haven't seen yet, but this is a little bit waterlogged. I overwatered this. This is a begonia Sarawak, which I got from my friend Jing. Do you see all the edema in the leaves? It's doing fine, and it is growing quite a lot. Like, it grew quite a few leaves since she gave it to me, but I just overwatered it this one time. I don't know if you can see, the water line is like up to here, and it has been rooting. It has to have rooted for it to be growing, I'm pretty sure. So this one, I just want to get into a cuter looking pot, and I don't think it's going to be as fussy with the repot than alocasia. So this one, I just wanted to get it into a cute pot, and that's literally it. It can live in this. There's no reason for the plant to go into another pot for now. I just wanted to get it looking cuter because I wanted to get it into this little thing. Don't you think that would be cute? This, like that. This is like a kind of smoky brownie green. I don't know if you can see the color of it. This one came off of a candle, and I don't even remember which candle it was, but I loved the container so much. And this one, I think once it gets going, is going to grow like out of control like crazy because her mother plant that she's been propagating from is in this cup. So it's this massive mother plant, and it's been living in this size cup in pond for ages, and it's no drainage, and I don't think she has any plans of repotting it anytime soon. She just keeps cutting from it. So I think this size will be good for it to live in long term. I have not potted in pond for so long, and I actually started to really miss it. And it's not even just for plants like this where it's just getting potted into pond. Actually, I might dump this out because I'm going to do this where some of it's going to fall into the cup. So yeah, it's not just for plants being potted in pond like this. It's also like I wanted pond to amend tree fern. Like for those plants I recently potted into tree fern perlite mix, my ideal choice would have been to pot it into tree fern pond mix with possibly added perlite, but that was not an option for me at the time. So I think for like any future finicky anthurium, I probably will be doing that instead of tree fern and perlite. Also, I feel like it should go without saying, but if you don't want 80 liters of pond, like you don't think you'll ever go through 80 liters of pond, then you should find like at least one other person to split the big bags with, because I do think it is better than buying the small amount. What the heck? The small amount of ingredients and making a smaller amount, because at that point, you're just not really going to save as much money. So this one is done. I love how this pond looks. It's like lechuza pond, but dark. I think because of the black lava rock, it looks so good. And I also was thinking of using the black lava rock as top dressing for some of my desert plants. I feel like that would look really nice in a ceramic pot with just lava rock on top. I just think that would be so cute in a little shallow pot, little cactus in the middle, black lava rock. Okay, so this is turning into like the fastest repot of all time. This one is done. Next, let's do the Tanderusa. Okay, so this one, I really hope I can get this out. I think this will come out in more of one chunk because it is more rooted than the other ones. And I'm not going to pot this like all the way to the top. I'm gonna leave some room so as it gets taller, I can just add more pond to it. Oh, that came out in more or less one piece, and I'm just gonna drop it straight in. Actually, I'm gonna pull this sheath off. I think that should be good. Pond is just so easy to work with. Okay, so are you stable-ish? Also, if you are looking for perlite and you want to know like the best perlite to get at like a large volume, is the Supreme Perlite. I'm going to put in a photo right here. That's going to be the next perlite that we buy, as in Jing and Charmaine we're going to split, because it comes in a 130 13-liter bag. It's the size of a human, and it's, I think, $40 Canadian. So I'm pretty sure it would be available in the US because I know the majority of you are in the US. So any prices that I've ever named in Canadian, basically just take 30% off, and that's US dollar. So it is a very economical way of getting good perlite. And this is like the nice chunky stuff. Like there's going to be smaller pieces, but the majority of it's going to be like that perfect number 3 size. And it's so good. It would actually be the perfect size to mix into this size pond. So Tanderusa is finally done. It's in a much more appropriate size pot. I cannot believe it was growing in this for so long. It was like fairly happy. Like prior to this specimen, I had owned only one other Tanderusa, and I got it from the garden center, and it died so fast in my care after I repotted it. So I was not expecting this one to grow so well. Is it the biggest Tanderusa ever? No, but by my standards, it's pretty dang good. Just a little bit bleached. This one doesn't need water because the pond is so wet, but I will be giving it a bit of great white after. I'll be doing the great whiting off camera because you guys have seen it a million times. So the last one is this green on green Friedeck. It's also going into the exact same pot. Now this one is probably not going to come out in one piece. Hopefully that stratum that's in here will mitigate the shock. Now this one's gonna look a little bit weird because it's gonna be like pond, perlite pond, but that's fine. Okay, so this was literally the quickest repot segment I've ever done in my whole entire life. But this one is now done. I don't know if the next time you see this, it will look any better because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get into a better light situation. But best case scenario is it does not throw a fit from being repot. And hopefully one day I'll be able to get it grow big because this mature I think would look so cool with like the lime green on green. Oh my God. I was literally about to do the outro and we didn't even do the begonia yet. Hold on. I was like setting up to do the outro and I was like, wait a minute. This one, I think I have to plant it pretty high just because it doesn't really have an upright growth pattern. So I have to plant it pretty close to the top. I'm not going to be watering this one because I want it to dry out a little bit just because it has edema. But once it's potted up, I'm going to put it back into my little exo, which is pretty high humidity because it's sealed on top with glass until it starts growing again. And once it looks pretty healthy and strong, I won't be able to tell the roots necessarily because of the glass, but once it looks like it's stabilized, I want to move it into my Mills bowl because I want to see it more often. This little begonia is like one of my favorites just by observing the growth habit. When I see it as like a big full bushy plant, it's not like one of the cane begonias that just go really, really tall and they grow too fast for their own good and you can't contain them. This one grows into this like cascading bush. So I think this is definitely a begonia I can see myself growing for long term. And I don't think it's all that fussy either. Okay, so this one I think is done. It's so cute. It's a little bit see-through, but it's very cute and I really like it in this glass. Okay, now we are done repotting. Anyway, that is it for me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. In conclusion, I highly recommend pon as a substrate since you cannot get lechuza pon in North America. If you're in Europe, you probably still can, but if you can't, please let me know because I'm nosy and I want to know. Is it absolutely necessary to make your own pon? That is totally up to you. Is it cost effective for you? Do you need it to be cost effective, or is your time more valuable? Do you have a very limited amount of space to store these components? Because these bags are pretty big. They're not the most massive bags in the world, but it does really, really add up. So what do you want to prioritize? If you're one of those people that just don't have the space nor the desire to be mixing your pon, you don't have anywhere to rinse them, you don't want to be washing it down your sink, then I will be listing a few sellers that I know that make a version of pon, and check them out. They'll be in Canada, they'll be in the States. I don't know about Europe. If I can find Europe, I'll find Europe. Anywhere else in the world. But also if you know of a pon seller that's not listed there and it's in a specific part of the world that I haven't mentioned, please feel free to leave it in the comments. I'm sure people would love to know. And with that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you guys so much for watching and thank you so much for the patience. over the past few years while I said I was going to do this video and I didn't, but we finally have it now. I hope your weekend has been lovely so far. I love you so much and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.